Greetings, everyone, to another Swedenborgian Community Online Thursday interview and community chat. We are very much honored this evening. We have the president of the Swedenborgian Church of North America on the line, Reverend Jane Siebert. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. It's quite our honor, and I know a lot of our listeners and viewers are really excited to hear what you have to say and get to know you a little bit better.
Well, I appreciate it too, and maybe they'll have some difficult questions to answer.
Yeah. If you hear that in our chatsy, think up like really difficult questions for Reverend Siebert. Am I saying your last name right?
Yes, you are.
Is it Siebert?
Okay, great. I know I've been saying it wrong in the past, so I'm trying to get it right. Thank you. Well,
you've got it right.
Great. And I think the first question that comes to my mind is you are the president of our denomination, the Swedenborgian Church of North America. What is that organization and what's that role for you?
Well, our churches are all, the societies are really congregationalist, which means they own their buildings, they pay their ministers, they have that responsibility, but we still have a structure that holds us all together, and that is the General Convention, or the Swedenborgian Church of North America. We use both names. And it tries to provide leadership for the churches and to help them when issues come up that they need advice. We have a structure, as you mentioned, I'm president now, and that is an elected position. Then we also have an elected vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And our general council, that's the governing structure, has 9 additional people that are elected for 3-year terms, 3 of whom are ministers and 6 are laity. So we come together when there are issues that need to be discussed, or if we have plans and ideas for new ways to do things. We meet face-to-face twice a year, and then we have conference calls in between. So that's kind of the basic structure. We are, because we're a relatively small denomination, there are not a lot of layers. I am paid as president, but most everyone, the rest of the people that work on general council, are all volunteers, and we need their volunteer wisdom and guidance, and appreciate so much that they are willing to give of their time and energy and wisdom in guiding our churches and our societies and our camps that are located throughout the United States and Canada.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing kind of what the organization is and who makes up the Swedenborgian Church of North America. Yeah, volunteers are really invaluable, and the people who just show up and share their wisdom, as you said. I feel that way quite a bit with the online community, as I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers know. It's really kind of beautiful how an organization can be really fed and uplifted by volunteer workforce. And we in this community, we also have Valerie Brugler, who's an amazing worker, tech support, what have you. She does it all, and it's nice of us who get paid something, and it's amazing those who show up and don't get paid, right?
Right, and that really fits right in with our theology. Swedenborg always talked about how important it is to be of use, and how we show our love to the Lord by being of use to others. So it fits right in with one of the major foci of our theology.
Yeah, and I not to riff back on the online community again. But I want to say more about Val, just because I mentioned her as tech support. But as you're saying, like, to be of use to the community, Val helps with our banners, a lot of our scheduled emails that end up on social media too, and she's of real use. And I hope each of our listeners feel like they can be of use in the organizations that they're a part of and can uplift it. Do you feel like you're able to do that in your work as the president of convention?
One of the things I enjoy the most is traveling out to our churches, having opportunity to really meet the people there. It's one of our advantages of being a relatively small denomination is, I can travel to all the churches and visit with them and find out what they are interested in and what their needs are. And we do the same. General Council works really hard to know what's going on in our churches and to bring that information together when we meet, so that we're not because sometimes our churches can feel rather isolated. Many states only have one or two Swedenborgian churches. Many states do not even have a Swedenborgian church there, and so it's important that we keep communication open and share with one another and help one another whenever we can with the things that everyone's dealing with in their societies and churches.
Well, I know in my experience with you, Reverend, you are quite the support and the connector for this, country, continent-wide organization. And we're quite blessed to have you at the reins, Jane. So thank you.
That's very kind of you. I just recently, last weekend, I was at our retreat center called Temenos, which is located in Pennsylvania. A beautiful, beautiful retreat center on 56 acres of trails and trees and beautiful landscape. They have a wonderful peace path that they have created, and the retreat center is open to anyone from any walk of life that they want to hold a retreat. That's available to them. But then they also have the church services there in an old farmhouse that I think it dates back to the late 1600s, early 1700s. It's just an amazing space to have church. So we have all this variety within our denomination, and as president, I get to see that and visit with the people, and that's a gift for me.
Well, we're happy you're blessed in the role, Reverend, and yeah, that sounds amazing. I've never been to Termina. How do you say it? Temenos?
Temenos, yeah, it's a Greek word. It means sacred place.
Excellent. Yeah, I've heard of Temenos. I've never had the pleasure of going. Maybe we could have a online retreat there sometime.
There you go. Well, it's actually when you're on the foundation board, which meets in Westchester, it's only a few miles from there. So.
Oh wow. Well, maybe I'll visit. I'm heading there in just a month or two. That's great. Well, and as you said, there's quite a variety in this denomination. Like so many amazing organizations, and they're not just churches as we know it, right?
That's right. We have some very innovative ministers and lay people that are trying a variety of new things. In Silver City, New Mexico, they're trying to move from a small place that they've been renting into a larger place right in the middle of town so they can have like a coffee house church. We have a church in San Pedro that's called the Garden Church, and they come together and garden together on Sunday afternoon and then have a worship service and then share a meal together. And they're reaching a variety of people. There are quite a few unhoused that come particularly for the meal. But interestingly, they also like to come for communion. And it's wonderful to visit there and see that group of volunteers that work hard to garden together and then use the produce and other things to make a meal for people.
Yeah, that's amazing. the Garden Church is really trying to reach out to the community and is touching a lot of people's lives. It's
Yes, a new way to do church. That's what we need to look for in this day and in this era, that some people are turning away from traditional churches and trying to create a welcoming space in different ways so people can find their way back to worship God and to come together as community.
What I really appreciate about your vision, Reverend Jane, is that you want to lean into kind of re-envisioning church, and as at least in my view of Swedenborgianism, and I'm curious on your take, that we are not quite church as most people know it in this country. We don't necessarily think, in my reading of Swedenborg, and I believe in yours, we don't think you have to be Christian to go to heaven. You don't have to have a certain set of creeds or approach to ministry, even baptism, things like that, of course. Especially if you don't have to be Christian, of course, you don't need that to have a connection with divinity. Do you agree that Swedenborgianism is kind of a different take on Christianity, and we should embody that?
That's what brought me into it. Actually, Swedenborg, for writing in the era that he did, in the early 1700s, and having that openness and understanding that you can, that God is big enough for everybody, and God works to create a way that can connect with each and every person in a way that they can receive a higher power, the divine, all the different names that we have. My husband and I were in the Peace Corps right out of college, and having grown up in a traditional mainline Christian church, some of the things that I'd learned and that I believe didn't quite fit when I traveled over to Africa and lived with these wonderful people that had their own tribal understanding of, sometimes it was gods or God, and I didn't understand. It didn't make sense that there would be a God that would isolate anybody or say that there is only one way. And my husband was a Swedenborgian, and that's how I found my way into the Swedenborgian tradition. And I think because of that, I really believe this, because of that, I am a Christian today, because it's not an exclusive Christianity, it's an inclusive Christianity.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to be mindful of the folks we have in our chat room. So I'm going to take a glance and see what's going on. If you all have any questions, please post them. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to see Ward, Paige, Alyssa, Albert, William, and all the people listening as well, and then hopefully watching on YouTube, our newest venture. It looks like we have a few questions for you, Reverend. First, hopefully they're really tough. Again, what's the difference? What's the difference between our convention and the general church? So that's I'll let you answer. Yeah.
Right. The first church that was started, or the first group that came together to create what we call a convention in Pennsylvania, was actually 200 years ago. Last year we celebrated the 200th anniversary, and they came together because they realized they needed to support one another. There were these individual churches popping up around, primarily in the New England states, but also as far out as Ohio and in that area. So they came together and created what was called the General Convention, and that served until the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was a difference in opinion, and so a group broke away into what is now known as the General Church. And the way I look at it is there are different aspects of the Swedenborgian church because people are different, and there's different things that people need from their society, their church that they go to. If you stand back and look at us, what what I think one of the differences, there are many differences, we tend to be what is called the more liberal branch, and they are the more conservative branch. So they've held to these beliefs about education. They educate their children wonderfully. They have a school system that is just unparalleled in bringing their faith and their education together in their school systems. And so they stay, and they're very close in their community ties. We ended up, and they're Episcopal in nature, so they have a priesthood and a different governing structure than we have within General Convention. So when you look at just the differences between people today that tend to have a more conservative bent and a more liberal bent, those are exemplified within the two different branches. And there's also one other one that broke away from the General Church called the Lord's New Church. So just like all the major mainline churches and denominations, there have been separations in the past.
Yeah, so there's a few different denominations of Swedenborgians, quote unquote. And as you said, our denomination tends to be more liberal, less stringent, dare I say, on believing X, Y, and Z to be part of the church, even in ministry, perhaps. And as you mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we have open ordination of women. We have open ordination of gay, lesbian.
And they don't.
We feel that God calls all people to service and to ministry, and so we try to create our seminary, which is located out in Berkeley, California, teaches and works with people that are going to a variety of different seminaries throughout the United States, or they can go to the seminary located out in Berkeley. But we do a lot of online classes and try to enable those that are called into service to study where they're located, to get their MDiv in a variety of different traditions, and then tie that together with the Swedenborgian coursework and a variety of experiential preparation for ministry.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so they don't ordain women or LGBTQ folk. And I think a lot of people would say that's a pretty conservative stance by church, any mainline church in America, right?
And so we just open our doors, and those that do not find a home there anymore, they're more than welcome to come and move to convention. And there's some people that have felt we are not conservative enough, and so they've moved the other direction. So
well, there you go. To each their own, as you said. Well, I appreciate you uplifting those details and how we try to have an open door within this denomination. And we also don't want to judge the other groups for having their differences of opinion. But some things to many people are a little backwards, right? Backwards opinions, like not ordaining women or LGBTQ folks. But we all have our own opinion, and I invite anyone listening to share theirs and why, and maybe we can have continue the conversation on it. And you also mentioned kind of the structure of the different churches and how one is a little bit more hierarchical. So the bishop of that church makes a lot of the decisions around policy and even officially what they believe, whereas you wouldn't say you decide what we all can really kind of point to, right?
That's right. Their clergy is more involved in the decision making, where we rely on the laity a lot for the decision making and the leadership, in addition to the ministers.
Well, and that was a beautiful thing that you mentioned earlier, how we're more of a horizontal structure, and a lot of our organizations, I should say, are bottom up, and laity led, all the people that are part of the organization. And I think that's really empowering when the laity can make decisions. So do you think that's a positive in a way for our groups?
I think that is a very positive way, because I do believe in the ministry of all people, and this is like my third my third occupation in my life, and I feel that each one of them was a calling, a different calling, and you just try to stay open and follow, look for that door marked yes, and walk through it.
Wow. Oh, that's beautiful. And I should thank Albert for that wonderful question. And just so we can get...
Hi, Albert.
Yeah, you know Albert, a long time.
Oh, he's a faithful at convention. It's kind of confusing because General Convention has an annual convention. And we're thinking we should change the name of that because convention having a convention is kind of confusing. But we do have an annual gathering, and it moves all over the United States and Canada. Last year we were in California, and this year we'll be in Indiana. So Albert is very faithful to come to convention and be a part of the discussions and the music and all, sharing his gifts.
Yes, and Albert has many gifts, including his music. And yeah, it was really nice to get to meet him at convention this last year, which was my first time meeting Albert. And we also have Paige welcoming you, of course, as many people have, and asking, what are the commonalities between the different organizations within the denomination?
The commonalities are that we all honor the writings of Swedenborg and how they illuminate the scripture. In fact, again, that was just a personal story. That was the way that Swedenborg's writings open the word into, and I'm speaking of the Bible as the word, open it to make it a personal story and to make it a guideline for my life. When we came back from the Peace Corps, we lived in the church parsonage because they offered it to us for $50 a month, and I was pregnant, and I often say barefoot and pregnant because we didn't have a lot of money. So we moved into the church parsonage, and we would attend church, but it didn't. It takes that one moment where you're kind of searching, and someone opens up what Swedenborg has written in a way that touches your heart. And my first degree was in psychology, and you just have an affinity for psychology. And the person that was teaching the adult Sunday school class was talking about how all those battles in the Old Testament are really related to our own psychological struggles as we try to put down those things within us that we, wish were better and trying to improve in our lives. And she was talking about the Amalekites, some people say, but in the Old Testament, you'll hear about these people that were always fighting against the Israelites and coming up from behind. And I always wondered about the battles in the Old Testament and why God would tell people to, kill all the men, women, children, even the animals. And I just had turned away from the gift that there is within the Old Testament. And what she explained was that the Amalekites are like those personal times in your life where you're tired and you're just kind of worn down, and you start to have those doubts and those questions about your own worth and who you are as a person. And that, so whenever I feel that, I just know, man, the Amalekites are trying to get me today, and I need to fight them back. It is a battle sometimes to not let those feelings. That I know a lot of the stories and the understandings of the different stories in the Old and New Testament are studied the same within both aspects and both branches of our, or all three branches of our denomination, and just trying to understand Scripture and how it applies to our life, and to turn to the writings of Swedenborg to deepen our understanding and our connection with God as we understand God.
Yeah, I really love what you uplifted there. It's awesome that story speaks to you still, so impactfully because of that kind of metaphorical or internal quality to it that you were able to relate to your life because of, an amazing teacher, it sounds like. That's really great. And I've been impressed by the ministry within this church because so many ministers, and actually I should just talk generally, as you say, about the ministry, so many people within this group, and affiliated or not, or in interaction with it, they are able to look at a lot of these scriptural stories so deeply and apply it to their living, their internal living, their motivations, their journey of transformation in ways that are quite mind blowing, and it's really wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you, Reverend, and thank you, Paige, again for asking about that. And let's see if we have a few other questions. Paige uplifts the idea in connection, I think, with what we were talking about earlier, that the tenet in one of the tenets of Swedenborg that she values the most is that he can find, or we can all find the Lord no matter what our religion is. Yeah, and I think for me that kind of connects back to what you were saying around looking through the literalism and some of the real issues in certain stories and certain details, especially how we often read them in biblical and Hebrew scripture. And of course there's other ways to read a lot of those stories, but often, yeah, what we read is these kind of horrific situations, and looking at that and not dismissing the issues there, like genocide, for example, but also being willing to look at the deeper point and see if it has like a metaphorical quality, because as the gospel always underlines, Christ speaks in parable constantly, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that was something that, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just thinking how, how the Bible has withstood time. And I think it is because, you can pick up the Bible and read a story that you've read so many times, but this time it touches you in a different way, and it touches your heart. And I think that's that amazing quality of the scripture, is that God can speak to you through these words that maybe at the first time you read them didn't really make any sense. And then as we continue to study and open our minds and hearts, that the messages can come through to us at different times in our life. And it's the same way with Swedenborg's writings, at least that's what I find, is our adult Sunday school class in Pretty Prairie, Kansas, the Dole Notes. And there's 6 books, and it covers, pretty much all the way through what's considered the Word. But yet you can teach that lesson and then come back to it 3 or 4 years later and teach it again, and you just find different things within the writings that now you're ready to receive. So I think it's a real gift for many people, as it never gets stale, I guess, is part of it, because the Lord can always open something new for us when we're reading it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's
Right.
dynamic, and there's a lot of layers, and not in a confusing way, interestingly enough. Often it kind of sheds light on all these aspects of scripture that are often confusing, right? Yeah, one example I love to give is just the Genesis story, and point out, for Swedenborg at least, this 18th century scientist turned mystical theologian, the Genesis story wasn't a literal story in terms of the creation. It was more about human development, the stages of it, like generally stages of human development, that at first, we think things are kind of worthless and void, or at least we're in the dark, and then some type of awareness, deeper spiritual awareness shows up, let there be light, and then the process of transformation continues down the line. And I always thought that was just a beautiful interpretation and understanding of that story and many others.
Right, I agree. it's a good one to start with too, because it's right there at the first of the Bible, and there's been so much confusion about that creation story, and how do you take that creation story and make it useful in your life? And that exactly is how you do. It's also your own psychological journey and your own progression and your regeneration is the word we often use.
Yeah, regeneration, the work of salvation that the Lord does in us, if we allow ourselves to gravitate towards goodness, which I think many of us do, no matter what our creed is.
Yes, that spiritual journey.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word and these stories, and I do want to uplift that for Swedenborg, he had an interesting relationship with the Bible as a whole. He didn't think every book had this kind of internal sense. Like he liked Paul's letters in certain ways, but he didn't think that they had this kind of deep metaphorical thing. But then on the other hand, he also thought like the natural world and everything almost had this kind of deep metaphorical story about human transformation, and that it could also show up in other people's scriptures, in other religions. And so he always talked about the Word being those books in the Bible that he kind of really got that out of. But to him, the Word is like, in my understanding, is kind of the essence of structure, of truth in the universe that speaks to us and creates and uplifts us.
One of the ways that I've looked at it is some of the Bible needs that deeper layer to understand, and some of it is just more apparent at a literal level. And so, we study the whole Scripture. That we don't just pick out certain books of the Bible to study, but some of them we study in more depth.
Sure. Well, we don't. We try not to dismiss any scriptural book or book that someone finds kind of a holy connection with, in my view at least, right?
Oh, right. There's truth in all faith traditions.
That's wonderful. And I want to ask just a little bit about your call to ministry and your history as a minister. I'm curious about, you mentioned your husband was Swedenborgian, but I'm curious, how did it all strike you at the beginning?
Right. I was not ordained until 2004. My first profession, I was a pharmacist and moved up into management and was in charge of a chain of pharmacies for a while, until I just felt that I didn't like the direction that my life was going. I had 2 children, and so I was able to leave that position and really just thought I would concentrate more on the children and my own spiritual journey. And then when I was visiting, we have a beautiful glass chapel that's located outside of Los Angeles at Palos Verdes. It's called Wayfarers Chapel, and I was at convention there, and there was a beautiful ordination going on. And as I watched that ordination, I just felt tears coming into my eyes, and I felt that the Lord was calling me into this new direction to work towards ordination. And I was at a point in my life where I really wasn't looking for another career, but I then followed that and was ordained at our church in Kitchener, Ontario, as I mentioned, in 2004. And initially I worked as a hospital chaplain in a large trauma center in Wichita, wow, Kansas, and worked there started out part-time, and as most things do, part-time leads to full-time, and I thoroughly enjoyed that chaplaincy and what it taught me. At the same time, I was offering services at the Pretty Prairie Church when I could, and then I moved into pulpit ministry and congregational ministry and I served there's 2 churches in Kansas. You'll love these names. There's one in Pretty Prairie, Kansas, and one in Pawnee Rock, Kansas. And both just small little burgs that have these churches that still continue today. So I served the churches, and then I went on to the seminary board. We were at a very difficult time where we were moving our seminary from Boston, needed to find a new way of doing, offering the seminary education for our potential ministers, because we realized we needed them to be more out in the world instead of just in the small group of Swedenborgians. So we moved to Berkeley, California, and I was chair of the board when we made that move to Berkeley. And it was kind of during that time that I realized that I was having my own personal call into the ministry, and so was able to participate there. And I guess the rest is history. I never planned to be president of convention either, but just felt the call, and people asked me about if I was interested in serving, and so I ran for the position and was elected, and that was 2 years ago. 3 years. I was elected 3 years ago.
Years fly by.
Yeah. Well, the first year you just serve as a training. You overlap with the current president. So I've only been president for 2 years, but I was elected 3 years ago.
Yes. Well, that's a nice, year of transition. I hope that you get to learn from the person who had the position before.
Right. It's very important. There's a lot to learn. I'm still learning.
I bet. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your journey, and it's quite the journey. It's wonderful. And, I could ask a lot of questions about certain details through it, but, I just want to question you about your call when you were feeling it. Did you feel like you wanted to serve people in more of kind of a spiritual role, or what was kind of the leaning of the call, or an aspect of it? I'm curious, because it sounded like you were serving so wonderfully.
Really, the leaning of it was the call to study deeper the writings and to understand how to share them with other people, because I realized that just like for myself, growing up in a mainline Christian church, but it was not a church that I was allowed to question things. And I realized that for my own growth, I needed to be able to question, and I knew that there are people throughout our world that are looking for this type of gift to be able to come together in community and not say it has to be any one way, but try to understand and work and learn together and study together. And that's what I wanted. I felt called to lead that, but also as serving as part of the training that we offer for our ministries. Everyone does what's called clinical pastoral education, and I looked at it as just one more hoop that I needed to jump through to be a minister. But when I went to the hospital and served in that capacity of meeting these parents whose children have just been in a horrific accident and not knowing, if they're going to live or die, and meeting with people that are traveling these most difficult times in their life, I was just really drawn to chaplaincy. And our theology really fits with what you need to be a chaplain, because it's not a matter of trying to save someone from where they currently are. It's a matter of meeting them where they are and just listening to their story and providing that listening ear and that help, which I was so glad I didn't feel like I needed to go into those rooms and try to save them, because God was doing that work. I just needed to be there to listen, and I realized that our theology, in my opinion, it works very well with chaplaincy, and I loved that opportunity and that time to do that.
Wow, that's great. You went into it not knowing what you would run into, and you found this really impactful, amazing work. It sounds like kind of a niche, really, for you and maybe for other Swedenborgians, perhaps.
Right. We have quite a few of our ministers that are working part-time or full-time in chaplaincy right now.
Yeah, a lot of our ministers are chaplains, especially in like hospitals and hospice care. Would you say?
Right, and some that work in long-term care facilities.
Mm.
So there's a variety of positions that you can fulfill when you have your. It does require usually an MDiv in order to be certified as a chaplain. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's quite the journey. Yeah. The chaplain. Not only the MDiv, but you have to go through each level of CPE, as you mentioned, and training, which is a really kind of reflective learning system. Um,
Right.
You went through that training. A lot of people have like some amazing stories from that. Was it an interesting journey for you?
It was an interesting journey. Yes, I was. It worked really well because I was working in a hospital that offers CPE, and so I was able a lot of the time to work and take the classwork and the coursework, and then work towards my board certification as a chaplain. But yes, you learn a lot about yourself when you're doing it. It's kind of like psychotherapy sometimes. You need to learn about your own self in order to get yourself out of the way to help others.
Yeah, that's true, and always a process for each of us, I hope.
Right.
Yeah, I did just one unit of CPE, and that was intense enough at a hospital. And yeah, that's why I reacted when you mentioned being at a trauma center, and oh my gosh, it's like, I found it pretty tough going into room after room, meeting with patients and families who are going through these really tough situations, and you never know what you're really going to encounter. But it's probably going to be intense, right?
That's right. And one of the things that I found is it just kept me very close to the Lord, because I knew before I went into one of those rooms that I couldn't go in alone. I needed higher power, the divine. I needed more than I could offer them, and I never felt like God let me down.
Wow, that's wonderful. You feel like God uplifts your spirit and your strength, the source of you kind of moving through life and being who you are.
Yes, and in some of those situations, you have no idea what to do or what to say, and a lot of times you don't say anything. You just, you bring water to everyone. It's like chop wood, carry water. You just serve in the way that you can.
What's that expression you said? Chuck wood?
Oh, that's a Buddhist expression. Chop wood and carry water. I can't remember I think there's more to it than that, but yeah, but you just need to be aware of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, be present and willing to serve. Yeah, and I really am inspired by what you said earlier about how, as a Swedenborgian, you could go into those rooms, and because you didn't feel compelled to save them with a certain dogma, let's say, or theology, you could be there for them and uplift their spirits where they're at, where they're willing to engage with you and connect.
Right.
That was quite wonderful. Yeah, could you say more about that? Is that something you also found in your ministry after chaplaincy and maybe your ministry today?
I will always carry the lessons that I learned from chaplaincy, yes. And I think that's why it's so important, people training for the ministry, to have that opportunity to do a unit or two of clinical pastoral education. It's when you really have to deeply think about your own, what you believe, and does it make sense in the world today, and does it make sense with what you see and all the pain and suffering and joy that you find in a hospital? Does what you, like when they say when the rubber meets the road, your theology has to make sense to you. You can't go in with still having a lot of questions, although I still have a lot of questions. I mean, that was you have to know a little bit about who you are and what you believe in order to help other people in those situations. And it's not that you have everything figured out. That never happens. And the only time, as Swedenborg tells us, the times, and as Jesus tells us, the times that you think you have everything figured out, like the Sadducees, the Pharisees, if they think you have it all figured out, that's when you're really in trouble. It's best to keep your mind open, because God is always teaching and always showing us the way.
Yeah. I think it was Socrates, and I only know this because it was mentioned in like a TV show or something, but he said, the only thing I know is that I know nothing.
Right.
And I think Swedenborg said that's kind of the beginning of wisdom, realizing that, we don't really know much, and connecting with the Lord and divinity, and being willing to grow, and not get defensive or dogmatic about what we think we do now, is how we...
And even the angels are learning, you learn in this world and in the next. I think that's exciting.
That is exciting. And for those who don't know, in Swedenborgian spirituality, at least those of us who are really into Swedenborg, angels are like, dead people, right, in heaven, or even dead aliens in heaven, right?
Well, and we have the opportunity to be angels, yes.
That's wonderful. And we're connected to heaven now. It's just not quite the same as being fully aware of the spiritual realm, I guess.
Right. We have the opportunity to bring heaven to earth sometimes.
Yeah, and I like this subject, so I'm going to riff on it. We're uplifted by heaven, and that's how we're created in this relationship spiritually with each other, with the rest of the universe, with God, and everything of heaven is from the Lord. We receive all our goodness and wisdom from Sophia, from divinity, from the higher power.
Right.
Well, I want to maybe ask another question or two from the chat. See, we still have a few minutes. And first of all, they're very much happy with you sharing your stories, and very interested in a lot of the things you've said. Yeah. So, one question is, what do you like? What else do you think? I think we covered maybe a little bit of this, but what else do you think we bring as this small kind of interfaith, mystical Christian tradition to the Christian churches at large? Is the question from Paige, I believe. Yeah.
Well, what I see is that some of the things that Swedenborg wrote, centuries ago, I see really being integrated into other traditions now. And so often when someone will ask me, well, what is a Swedenborgian, or what do you believe? And when I talk to them about, and this is even sometimes with ministers of other traditions, when I talk to them about the fact that God is available to everyone, and God reaches out and comes to people in the way that they can receive God. And it's not a matter of what we say; it's a lot about how we live our lives and how we treat one another. And they'll say, well, I've always believed that too. And it's, to me, what we have to offer sometimes just makes sense to people. And if it resonates with them, then it's something that they can accept. And I don't think it's unique or just within our denomination. I think it's showing up in a variety of traditions, both Christian and other faith traditions. So it's kind of like, this truth is just showing up in a variety of areas because it is truth. And we have no corner on the truth. The truth is available to all people. It's available when you read the scriptures. It's available when you read other traditions, holy works. And I just see God just keeps knocking at that door, trying to tell us that life is better when you can walk alongside or let God lead in your life. And so we were never meant to be alone.
Profound words, Reverend. Wow. Yeah, what a refreshing take that you're willing to be open and loving and supportive of other religious groups, other points of view, and that you're excited to hear them sharing beautiful messages and to be you being inspired by them being inspired by each other and learning within our groups. I think that's something a lot of people do appreciate. And as you said, it just makes sense to people that this system, that this world would work like that, right? Versus something super competitive or something.
Right.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend, and thank you, Paige, for uplifting that. And yes, we did mention it earlier, but we use the acronyms pretty quickly. So the CPE that we were mentioning was Clinical Pastoral Education. Yeah, it's always good to pay attention to like our acronyms, of course.
Right.
And it's funny because when I hear Swedenborgians talk about angels, I'm always sure to mention Swedenborg's idea of angels because I think it's so cool. It's just a nice opportunity to say, to Swedenborg, or his interpretation of Scripture and his visions of the spiritual world, angels are just all these beings of diverse descent in heaven. And that we have that connection. We can be angelic somewhat in our own living even today, right now. And as you wonderfully pointed out, we're actually called and should try to uplift heaven in our spirit now and in the world today, in our actions today. And as you also mentioned, if I can just keep quoting you back to yourself, but being present is so important, and I feel like that's really what uplifting heaven comes down to. Is you're always going to be in the present, if you're awake somehow in this realm or another, and so uplifting heaven in the present moment is kind of always the name of the game. Are there any thoughts that you want to share with the community at large, or the denomination, or anyone listening, Reverend?
Well, actually, I was thinking sometime somebody needs to interview you. So you have the opportunity to answer these questions, and so you can share with the people your journey, because I think it's everyone has their journey, and you have a particularly interesting and kind of wayward journey that you came into the Swedenborgian Church. So I hope it's sometime. I just think it's so great that you're asking a variety of people, but one of these days someone needs to interview you.
Well, maybe we'll have you as a guest host sometime, and you can interview me and maybe some other people in the community. That'd be cool.
Yes, yes. You know,
Well,
I guess my one last statement I would like to make is one of the highlights of being president is the opportunity to participate in the ordination of new ministers. And last year, or this last summer, we were in San Jose, California, and I had the opportunity to ordain Reverend Cory Bradford-Watts, and Reverend Rachel Madrak. Rachel went, and she's continuing as a chaplain, and Cory has taken on this responsibility for the online community and reaching out to everyone there. And we're so blessed that he is willing to do that. And I want to thank him for his willingness to take on this position. And he is also going to be a minister in Kitchener, Ontario, where I was originally ordained. So there's a connection there too, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Jane. That means quite a bit to me. I really appreciate it. Yes, I'm excited to move to Canada. We are about to start talking with the immigration folks, and we should be there come January. So that'll be my other gig, and I'm really excited actually about how these communities can come together, and all our various activities can feed into each other. And yeah, I hope the community is excited about that too, and just as I hope that they are connecting us, with their communities in whatever ways they can, and hopefully that's something we can each and all lean into going forward, because this online community is a service and ministry to the denomination at large, not just the folks who listen throughout the week, but we try to uplift the group as a whole and connect people. So thank you, Reverend.
It's an important part of the ministry.
Yeah, and I was blessed to have you ordain me, and that was quite a trip. I still don't know if I quite believe it happened.
We have pictures to show that it did, Cory.
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures. But yeah, it was so beautiful and touching, you uplifting our spirits that day, and being willing throughout this whole journey to connect with us and really care about us, really want to, hear what we're going through, uplift any situation. And I think you're like that with everyone, not just the people, being ordained, that you really care about the people in this church and at large, the church of the universe, and that you try to be present with people and uplift them when you can. So thank you, Reverend Jane Siebert, for being such a beautiful blessing to us all.
Well, thank you, Cory.
Well, thank you all for joining us for another Thursday interview, reflection, and chat. Especially you all in the chat seat asking questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. I'll spend a few minutes connecting with you all there after this, and go forth knowing you are loved. Thanks, Reverend, for coming on. I know everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.